The final and greatest literary achievement of the Elizabethan and Jacobean age is the extraordinary amount of great plays having been written and staged, some of them of universal significance and reaching heights unattained since Greek and Latin antiquity. While Italy had failed and other European nations only later developed an equally remarkable dramatic art, England was first to resurrect almost effortlessly the glory of both comedy and tragedy, to invent nearly all the new possibilities of the modern stage, and to deliver a genius, Shakespeare, and a host of major talents. Even fairly stiff early efforts like Norton and Sackville's Gorboduc, 1561, fully imitated from the Latin tragedies of Seneca, demonstrate talent. The two young authors, 25 and 29 respectively, evidence striking originality. A national history subject taken from Geoffrey of Monmouth, you remember, the man responsible for the matter of Britain, disregard for Aristotelian unities, the rules of time and place and action, short sequences of dumb show, and the use of blank verse, unrhymed iambic pentameters, designed to become the reference format for Elizabethan tragedies. We all have it here already. So from the outset, something truly new and effective. If we take a look at Gorboduc, you have, indeed, this is really the opening, Act 1, Scene 1, a long description of a piece of dumb show, a symbolic action, of course. And then, if you read the pentameters, they're pretty plodding. They rhyme fairly heavily most of the time. The rhythm is pretty heavy. The silent night that brings the quiet pause from painful travels of the weary day prolongs my careful thoughts and makes me blame. You see, this is not very flexible, definitely, but it still has already a certain beauty. It does not sound like Shakespeare. It's all still with a medieval imprint, but already it's original. It's not a complete copy from Seneca. It's not a resurrection of Medea or Hercules Furens or something like this. It is an English subject written with English blank verse. Students of the Inner Temple were responsible for Gorboduc because they had organized the whole thing for their Christmas revels. But what is interesting is that the Queen immediately heard of it and ordered her own private representation in Whitehall as early as the next January, so not a moment of hesitation. In fact, the appetite and resources had long been there. From a whole generation of university wits, we discussed that in the first part on prose, fed on Latin. You remember those people completely fluent with Plautus and Seneca and really eager to resurrect this Latin theatre. So from these university wits to the necessary patrons, the curious aristocrats, and then the necessary spectators, town crowds eager for entertainment, and finally professional players. Everything was there, already available. From the beginning of the 16th century, there had been in England, indeed, numerous companies of actors, playing either in London or in provincial towns. They were regarded by many people as rogues and vagabonds, and their social status was uncertain, until 1572, when it was decided by law that if you belonged to any baron of this realm, it meant that you were no longer a rogue or vagabond. Therefore, the theatrical troupes put themselves under the protection of some powerful lord. The company would bear this lord's name, and the players would be called his servants, the lord servants, and therefore they were safe from arrest. They could not be arrested as rogues and vagabonds. Performances were at first given in inn yards, the actors playing on a platform erected on trestles. Later on, regular theatres were built. In London, the hostility of the Common Council was keenly felt by the companies of actors, who decided to evade difficulties by carrying their trade outside the walls of the City of London, where the City of London no longer had jurisdiction. In 1576, for instance, James Burbage, a member of the Earl of Leicester's company, erected a theatre in Shoreditch, and the following year another theatre, the Curtain, was raised nearby. Later on, they went to Southwark on the south bank, the Rose, the Swan, and the Globe, the latter, of course, being especially associated with Shakespeare. Those English theatres were circular. Shakespeare in Henry V describes the house as this wooden O, the outside being in fact hexagonal or octagonal. The pit was a sort of yard strewn with rushes, open to the weather, where people would stand, smoking, drinking beer or wine, eating nuts or apples, sheltering themselves from the rain in their cloaks. Around the pit there were galleries in which the wealthier patrons were seated, safe from the bad weather. And the young lords and gallants would even sit on stools or benches at the back of the stage. The stage itself consisted of a floor laid on trestles and was usually covered, partly at least, by a thatched roof. In the floor of the stage there was also a trap, allowing for the appearance and disappearance of ghosts. The scenery was very rudimentary. A few pieces of arras, well, that's tapestries and other hangings, small number of movable properties which served mainly for emblems. For instance, a tree would represent a whole forest, a pasteboard rock would represent a whole cliff. The imagination of the audience had to do the rest. Again, this is from Henry V. The chorus says, "Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man, and make imaginary puissance. Think, we speak of horses, that you seize them. Think, when we speak of horses, that you see them, printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth." Sometimes you had a board with big letters to indicate the name of the locality whither the spectator's imagination must resort. The companies of actors, that's an important point, did not comprise any women. The feminine parts were played by boys whose voice had not yet broken. Right, okay, sort of. Now, of course, I have provided illustrations, classic illustrations of the outside and the inside of those theatres. I have also provided here on the left the frontispiece of the big hit of the 1586 season, Thomas Gid's lurid The Spanish Tragedy. Of course, with a lurid engraving where you can see Hieronymo discovering his son, who is hanged. You see here on the left, he is hanged in an arbor, and the whole tragedy will be about his revenge against the murderers of his sons. Now, you really have to realize that there was no copyright in those days. So publishers, who were often both printers and booksellers, jumped on the opportunity of printing plays as soon as possible. Very often, they did not have a script. There was no manuscript given to them. Sometimes they even sent people to watch the play and memorize the text by heart. At best, what you had were copybooks lent by actors from the original representation, and this was used to proofread the printed version. Therefore, many plays, including Shakespeare, were, and still are, definitely garbled, and they need thorough editing. We do not have, most often, the original manuscripts. And this is why, sadly, many other plays were downright lost. All in all, from 1580, when the boom started, to 96, there were more than 100 different plays performed in London. That gives you an idea of the sheer mass of output. And this included the works of Lilly, Kidd, Peele, Green, Marlowe, many others. I cannot, of course, investigate all the names, but I have to mention at least the greatest. Among the greatest is definitely Christopher Marlowe. He was the son of a poor shoemaker of Canterbury. However, perhaps to the assistance of some friend of the family, he made excellent studies, first at King's School, Canterbury, the school that still exists, and later at Cambridge, where he took his degree in 1583. He then joined a theatrical company, as always, with a noble man patroning it, here the Earl of Nottingham. And this is where he produced his first tragedy, Tamburlaine the Great, 2 parts, written in blank verse. This came up hard on the heels of Thomas Kidd's great hit, The Spanish Tragedy, and somehow the audience were avid for bombastic lines. Geronimo, the hero of The Spanish Tragedy, is a revenger, an avenger, and his lines are indeed over the top. Marlowe reveled in that, and he created a great character in Tamburlaine. In French, that's Tamerlan, the Mogul emperor, conqueror of Asia. He created a character of a half-mad, barbaric monarch, delivering incredible lines on the stage, and this was massively successful. Marlowe became an instant celebrity. Then there was his real masterpiece, a play you must read, The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus. You simply must read it. In it you've got splendor of imagination, noble, surging blank verse, striking portrayal of the overreacher, that's Dr. Faustus. This is of course based on the legend of Dr. Faust. And of course, you know the story. This is Dr. Faust signing a deal, a compact with the devil, of course. You all know the story. We'll study in detail. You already have an excerpt here, but I have another one in the course brochure I want to have a look at. Then there were all other plays, as they were all tragedies. The Jew of Malta and Edward II. Unfortunately, Marlowe led, let's call it, quite a life, pretty colourful life. He might have been involved in spying activities, and anyway, he died in fairly mysterious circumstances, officially stabbed in a drunken brawl at Deptford in 1593. He died very young, before he was 30 years of age. So yes, Dr. Faustus, you really, really must read this play. Now, I have provided here another excerpt from the final scene. This is absolutely great. Faustus is about to meet his fate. His time is up. The devil is going to come and fetch him. He's got only a few minutes to live. The clock strikes 11. Ah, Faustus, now hast thou but one bare hour to live, and then thou must be damned perpetually. Stand still, you ever-moving spheres of heaven, that time may cease, and midnight never come. Fair nature's eye, that's the sun, rise, rise again, and make perpetual day, or let this hour be but a year, a month, a week, a natural day, that Faustus may repent and save his soul. O lente, lente curate noctis eque. This is from, I think, Virgil. Or is that Ovid? It's about the horses of the night, noctis eque. And it says, lente, lente curate. Run slowly, horses of the night. The night must slow down. The stars move still, time runs, the clock will strike, the devil will come, and Faustus must be damned. Oh, I'll leap up to my God. Who pulls me down? See, where Christ's blood streams in the firmament, that's the sky. One drop would save my soul, half a drop, ah, my Christ! Ah, rend not my heart for naming of my Christ. Yet I will call on him, oh, spare me, Lucifer! Where is it now? 'Tis gone. And see, where God stretcheth out his arm, and bends his ireful brows, his angry brows, mountains and hills, come and fall on me, and hide me from the heavy wrath of God. Okay, I won't go on, and I exaggerated it, but you get it. Marlowe is really full of a certain energy. It's really accessible even for first-year students. So, frankly, if I were you, I would very soon buy myself a copy of Dr. Faustus, because it's a wonderful play. Simply that. Beautiful blank verse. Unrhymed with iambic stress. 5 stresses. 5 feet. Definitely not as great as Shakespeare, but great. Definitely. Now, if we reserve Shakespeare for our next lecture, which we will do, we must, for want of space, skip examination of a number of contemporaries. Dekker, Chapman, Turner, Marston, Massinger, Beaumont, Fletcher, and sometimes Beaumont and Fletcher in collaboration, John Ford, Thomas Middleton, etc. Yet we cannot skip Ben Jonson for comedy and John Webster for tragedy. Webster was of humble origins. He had a long stage writing career as a sort of hack, collaborating with many others on comedies and tragi-comedies, but these are quite unrelated to the caliber and originality of his 2 great tragedies, The White Devil and The Duchess of Malfi. These 2 eerily morbid plays are based on recent Italian chronicles, recent at the time, of course, real events from real Italian history. He made it his own with an inimitable sort of blank verse, developing a bleak, violent, sarcastic vision of human nature. As T.S. Eliot, the famous 20th century poet, said of Webster, Webster always saw the skull beneath the skin. While Shakespeare's heroines are usually redeemed and vindicated in the end, Webster's innocent and courageous women fall victims to ruthless, evil relatives, and despite all their efforts to resist, they perish. It's totally bleak. So, just to give you an example, 2 lines from The Duchess of Malfi. Whether we fall by ambition, blood, or lust, like diamonds we are cut with our own dust. Now meditate that. Ben Jonson, by the way, yes, before we move on to Jonson, the dates. You see, 1612 for The White Devil, 1614 for The Duchess of Malfi. This means Webster was a Jacobean author. He came after Shakespeare, whereas, of course, Marlowe came somehow before Shakespeare. Ben Jonson, he was the posthumous son of a humble preacher of Scottish descent, but he was well educated. Again, some family friend helped and paid the fees for Westminster School. But then the boy was apprenticed to his stepfather, bricklayer, so maybe it's no wonder that he must have run away. He escaped. He served as a soldier in the Low Countries. That's the Netherlands. And he returned to London in 1597, married, and began to write plays. In 1598, he wrote his first comedy, Every Man in His Humour. This was brought out at the Globe Theatre, and Shakespeare was one of the actors, because don't forget, Shakespeare was not only a playwright, he also acted himself. Then there was his first tragedy in 1603, and this was followed by a long series of successful plays, most of them comedies. The best one, the one you really should read, is Volpone, or The Fox, 1606. Then there was The Silent Woman, The Alchemist, Bartholomew Fair, etc. He also wrote a lot of masques. We'll see that in lecture number 6. Court entertainments, pageants, etc. And also a pastoral, The Sad Shepherd. Beside the plays, Jonson wrote epistles, epigrams, elegies, songs. He was a sort of universal man of letters. At the death of Shakespeare in 1616, he was at the height of his powers. If you compare him to Shakespeare, there are fundamental differences. Shakespeare was far less cultured. Jonson famously taunted him for knowing little Latin and less Greek. Whereas, of course, Jonson was very much a learned man. Shakespeare allowed his imagination unbridled play. He was sometimes careless of expression, whereas, on the contrary, Ben Jonson aimed at truth. He was painstaking in the matter of style. Shakespeare didn't care about critics. Ben Jonson, on the contrary, did not write for the pit. He wrote also for the learned few. He venerated the Greek and Roman ancients. He disdained the applause of the crowd. Ben Jonson's characters, therefore, are more like abstractions, type of men under the permanent control of a permanent personal bias, what he calls humor. Key Renaissance concept. Therefore, his characters are sometimes stock characters, like the courtier, the fop. A fop is a kind of, elegant young man who's a bit too elegant not to be completely silly. The braggadocio, the braggart, that sort of thing. They tend to be repetitive, but sometimes, and in that respect, yes, he is inferior to Shakespeare, but sometimes you really get great scenes. This is how Ben Jonson himself defines humour. He says, "Why, humour, as 'tis ens," see, he uses the Latin word, substance. We thus define it, to be a quality of air or water, and in itself hold these two properties, moisture and fluxure, fluidity. As for demonstration, pour water on this floor, 'twill wet and run. In every human body, the choler, melancholy, phlegm, and blood, by reason that they flow continually in some one part and are not continent, receive the name of humours. The idea is that choler, la bile, qui crée la colère, melancholy, les sécrétions noires de la rate, le spleen, le phlegm, et le sang. These four substances in the human body were supposed to determine if they were predominant or not, were supposed to determine a specific type of character. And most of the comedies are based on that with Ben Jonson. So again, it's not as truthful, true to life as with Shakespeare, but sometimes it really works great. I recommend you reading you have the Volpone excerpt here, where all the characters, again, is pretty conceptual. They're all like animals. Volpone is the fox in Italian. He is the victim of a parasite, mosca, in Italian, the fly, of course. And he is surrounded by characters who all want his money. Voltore, of course, that's the vulture, you see. They all have names of animals. Okay, it's, again, not true to life, it's conceptual. But frankly, it can be very funny. And the blank verse, yet again, is pretty beautiful. Here, for instance, you have a scene that has been copied in so many comedy films. Volpone wakes up, and he wakes up to his money. Good morning to the day. And next, my gold. Open the shrine that I may see my saint. Hail the world's soul and mine. More glad than is the teeming earth to see the longed-for sun peep through the horns of the celestial rum, am I to view thy splendour darkening his, that lying here amongst my other hordes, show'st like a flame by night, or like the day struck out of chaos, when all darkness fled unto the centre. O thou son of Sol, son of the sun, but brighter than thy father, let me kiss with adoration thee and every relic of sacred treasure in this blessed room. Total adoration of money. He says he is more happy than the earth when the earth in the morning sees the sun, the longed-for sun, peep through the horns of the celestial ram. The ram is Le Bélier. Of course, he means the constellation of the ram. He is, like the earth, ever so happy to see the light, except his light is not the sun. It's that son of the sun, money. Finally, I must mention examples of great anonymous plays. For instance, Arden Faversham, excellent plays. Also very good collaborative plays, the best of which is probably The Witch of Edmonton by Rowley, Dekker and John Ford. But of course, we can't go into all the details. So this is it for what is probably the greatest period of English literature. Of course, film and TV references. The monarchs themselves have been portrayed time and time again on the screen, the silver screen and the small screen. I'm not too keen on the recent films with, for instance, the Kate Blanchett films. I very much prefer the old Glenda Jackson interpretation in Elizabeth R, 6 episodes. Okay, you'll have a go at these things if you have time. There's a very good film adaptation of Dr. Faustus. You will have understood Dr. Faustus is one of my great favorites. This is with Richard Burton. It's heavily adapted, but still it's fine. It's fine. There's a French film adaptation of Volpone, Volpone ou l'amour de l'or, 1941, Maurice Tourneur. Excellent film with Louis Jouvet. There's a final change in the plot, but still, it's really adequate rendering. Basic must-reads, well, the essays, Francis Bacon. Selections from The Fairy Queen, Dr. Faustus, of course, and indeed, Volpone.